Today we're talking about the lower body. If you want to throw 90 miles an hour and beyond, you need to have elite lower body mechanics. But here's the thing, most people just follow generic advice of, hey, push off the rubber, feel tension in the back leg, load into your back leg, which a lot of the time does more harm than good. And so today I'm going to break down the 4 steps that I think about when I think about elite lower body mechanics and how you can incorporate it into your delivery to increase pitching velocity. If you're new here, my name is Josh Gesser, and all we talk about on this channel is throwing 90 miles an hour and beyond. Because if you want to play at the Division I professional level these days, you just have to be throwing 90 miles an hour and beyond. But no guarantees. I just share what has worked for me to throw in the mid to upper 90s and what has worked for our athletes who have thrown 90 miles an hour and beyond. So let's get straight into the video. Okay, so the first step in the lower body that I think about that starts everything is obviously the leg lift. And so with the leg lift, one of the most important parts is actually being able to shift your weight slightly during your leg lift, right? You know, people call it the drift, but I just like to call it, you know, just shifting your weight a tiny bit toward the target, right? And this can look differently, right? Some guys are guys who can shift their weight as soon as they lift their leg, right? They can shift their weight and they're going toward the target. Other guys, you know, like myself, have to come to more of a gather or a balance point, and then, you know, we'll shift our weight like that, right? And some people, you know, can be all different and others can be in the middle, right? But the most important part is just shifting your weight and getting your center of mass going toward the target, right? And why this is so important is because if you don't shift your weight, right? And you know, some of the generic advice is like get to a balance point. And when you get to this balance point, now you need to start creating momentum toward the target, right? But if you're at a balance point, then all you can do from here is come down, right? You're gonna come down, and then to create momentum toward the target, you need to push off really hard with your back leg, right? And this causes all sorts of issues down the line that we'll talk about and why you don't want to be pushing off with your back leg. That's the reason why we need to start shifting our weight, is because one, it's going to create more linear momentum toward the target, which is going to help us throw harder, but also just set us up into better positions. And again, with shifting your weight, right, there are guys who can really shift their weight aggressively like this, right? But it doesn't have to be like that, right? For myself, when I shifted my weight, as soon as my leg came up, I felt really rushed. Right? And I felt like I lost my back leg and I couldn't get into my back leg. It was just like a fall and throw, right? And I actually started throwing a lot slower when I started doing that. But when I saw a lot of even Japanese players, right? You'll see back in the day like a Yoshinobu Yamamoto who comes to a balance point. He comes to an aggressive balance point. He's like pretty much still, and then he'll shift his weight and then go, right? And when I started to do that, not to that extent, right? I would still come to a gather, but then I'll shift my weight. When I started doing that, I felt a lot more relaxed, in sync, and I started throwing a lot harder. The first thing with the leg lift is just finding what works for you. We still need to shift our weight toward the target, but are you a guy who can, you know, who's really twitchy fast and can just, you know, just pick up and go? Well, do that, right? Or if you need a little bit more of a gather, then you can gather and then go. Either one isn't better or worse, right? There are guys who throw 100 doing both ways. And so you just need to find what works for you and what helps you time everything up at release, right? Because that's the whole point of the delivery, is to really sync everything up so you can put as much force behind the ball as possible. And if something is out of sync, then you're gonna be losing a lot of energy. That's the first step with the leg lift. We just wanna shift that weight slightly. The next step is the load into the back leg, right? And I like the term drop. I know this is something that is popularized a lot, but I really like that term, which is, hey, once we shift our weight, right, all we want to think about with our back leg is dropping, okay? It's basically like letting gravity pull you down, okay? And I love this for a couple reasons. So, you know, the quickest way to go down is through, you know, gravity, right? You can't go down quicker than if you just relax and let gravity take you down. When you do this, you can take advantage of the stretch shortening cycle. For example, when you're doing a vertical jump, there was a study that looked at which one was going to jump higher if they went down really slow and try to load their legs up as much as possible and then go, or the other group will just go down as quick as possible and then jump, right? Which one do you think jumped higher? The second group, which went down as quickly as possible, actually jumped higher, and it's because they were able to utilize more of that stretch shortening cycle, right? They're stretching the muscles and the tendons really quick, and then you get that rebound effect. It's not exactly the same in the pitching delivery because we're not, doing a vertical jump, but we still want to take advantage of that like stretch shortening cycle. And so basically with the back leg, all I think about is get down as quickly as possible because we're able to take advantage of that stretch shortening cycle. Back when I was a little bit younger, I was able to throw really hard with a slower delivery, right? It was like up, and then I would load my back leg as possible. And it would basically be like a pistol squat. But I wouldn't recommend that for too many people because firstly, I had outlier back leg strength, right? I was able to get into the deep position and still fire myself out of it without getting stuck. Most people that I've seen have this delivery can really get stuck, right? And not be able to rotate out of it. And the other reason is it's very, very energy consuming. It's very tiring to get into a pistol squat and then drive yourself out of it every throw versus, if you drift, drop, this is all free energy, right? It's drift, drop. You're not doing anything. Like dropping doesn't take up any of your energy, right? It's just letting gravity do its thing. And so you can sustain this velocity a lot more. The other reason why I really like this drop feeling is because if you go onto a force plate, right, where there's force plates beneath you, and one of the biggest correlations to pitching velocity is how much force you put into the ground with your back leg down and out, okay? And so, we don't want to actively do that by trying to push or anything, but the way to increase and peak our forces going down and out is actually to do the drop. When you drop, you're going to see that peak, you're going to see that forces peak, and the force plates are going to show a lot more force into the ground than if you actively tried to put force into the ground. I experimented with this, and every single time I would produce the most force when I would just drop as aggressively as possible. One cue that I really like that I heard is basically if you're standing straight and someone kicks your knee in, right? So if someone kicks your knee in, then you get into this drop position, right? Where you're not thinking about anything and you just drop. That's kind of the feeling that you want in the delivery. It's leg lift, and then it's aggressive drop down. That's gonna create maximal forces going into the ground, which is what we want from the back leg. So now we have the leg lift. We're shifting our weight a tiny bit, and then we've got our drop. Something that I didn't touch on was the reason why shifting our weight is so important is because when we do our drop, right, if we shifted our weight a little bit, right, and our center of mass is in front of us, then when we drop, we're actually going to create a lot of linear momentum toward the target. Rather than if we didn't shift our weight, then we'll be at a balance point, and then if we drop, it's going to be straight down, right? We're not going to be creating any linear momentum toward the target. And so that's why it's so important, just setting yourself up with the drift and the leg lift so that the drop actually creates linear momentum for you rather than, just staying stuck in place and just going straight down. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is still with the back leg. We've talked about how we want to drop. The back leg is very important for the direction of your throw as well. And this comes down largely to where you drop into in your foot. Okay, so for example, you can drop into, your toes. You can drop into your heel, right? There are all different parts of the foot that you can drop into. Now, this is very individualized, right? Some people are going to be able to produce more forces and throw harder when they, drop into their heel. I would say probably most guys are going to throw harder if they drop into their heel. But there are people who can throw harder if they drop into more of the, their toes or the sole of their foot, right? Get into more of the quad. And this is where I fall into. I'm a little bit more cross-body, and for some reason, my glute on my right side isn't very strong, but my quad is extremely strong, right? So I can drop into that quad. I'm a little bit cross-body, and then that's how I produce my max velocities. Other people will drop into their heel, right, and have a really linear delivery where they face the target and then they go and throw. That's something to experiment with as well. It's a little bit hard if you don't have any force plates, but you can just use the radar gun as feedback, right? Okay, when I drop into my toe, how does that feel? And do I throw it a little bit harder? Or heel, do I throw it a little bit harder? How does that feel? So those are the two big things that I think about with the drop or load phase, right? So now we've got the leg lift and then we've got the drop. Now, the third phase that I think about is the rotation. We want to get this pelvis, right, explosively rotating toward the target. And it all starts with actually keeping it closed for as long as possible. We want to keep it closed for as long as possible and then open it at the very last second extremely explosively. One of the big things with hip-shoulder separation, it's not about how much you get, it's about how late and explosive can you do it, right? I don't care how much hip-shoulder separation you get if you're doing this, right? You're not going to throw hard. But if you get, maybe half of that, but you stay close, boom, and it rotates explosively, you're going to throw a lot harder, right? And so the first step with that is actually keeping your pelvis closed. And there's a couple ways you can do this. One of my favorite cues for guys who struggle with staying closed, right, with the lower body and keeping their pelvis closed, is if you have a pen, right, you can put it here and you can just pinch it and it shouldn't fall out, right? And this is kind of the position that you want to hold until foot plant. You can pinch this and then you just go down the mountain, right? Leg lift, drop, and you drop into this position. And then you'll know that this pelvis is going to stay closed for as long as possible. You can't just drop and then have this pelvis, leaking open. You need to keep it closed and have it closed for as long as possible and then throw. Okay, so once you have it closed and you've dropped into this nice position that's closed, now what we want to do is start to initiate this pelvis rotating, right? And I can't stress this enough. This has to be as late as possible. If you do it early, it's just going to be a slow throw. Again, you need this to be late and extremely explosive. What happens here is that this pelvis starts to rotate, right? And the back leg helps it rotate. How I like to think about it is the back leg produces half of this rotation. Okay, it opens up half. We don't need to get this fully open with the back leg before the front foot hits. I actually don't like that as much, as if we can get it halfway and then the front foot will do the rest, and we'll talk about that in a second. How we like to cue this and help athletes who struggle with getting the pelvis open is through pretty much cues, right? So there are a couple ways we can do this, such as drive the knee down at the last second as hard as possible. So you drop, you're in your delivery, and you try to drive this knee down, right? And then this will help get this open a little bit. You can also think about, okay, I'm gonna get to my shoelaces on my back leg, right? And it gets this pelvis open when you actually get to the shoelaces of your back leg. So that's half of the pelvis rotation, right? The back leg initiating half of that pelvis rotation. And the other half I think about is with this front foot, right? So we land in this position where the pelvis is half open, and now the front foot, when it hits and it starts to put force into the ground, it's actually gonna pop this hip open, right, fully. Right? This is how I like to think about it, and this is how I ensure that this pelvis is rotating late and explosively. If I think about the back leg opening the pelvis, then it becomes too early. But when I think about, hey, like the front foot is gonna finish this rotation, now it's gonna be late and explosive because it's hit. I'm gonna put force into the ground, this pops it open, which pulls my torso and my upper body through. Okay, so that's what I think about with the rotation piece is, different cues for the back leg to actually help this rotation. But then now all you need to do with this front foot is put a lot of force into the ground and get this to pop open. Okay, so that's step 3. So we have the drift or, the leg lift, shift our weight. We're dropping into a nice counter-rotated position. And then we're initiating rotation, and now we're at the front leg. Now, the 4th step is the easiest step, which is the front leg block. All I really think about is putting as much force into the ground as possible. And to make it easier, I just think about extending it as hard as I possibly can. Now, obviously, you don't have to extend it hard. Obviously, you don't have to get into extension to throw hard. Guys like Walker Buehler back in the day when he was throwing 100, he would throw with a pretty bent back leg, right? But it was stable and it was putting a lot of force into the ground, which did its job. But for myself, I need to think about, okay, I'm trying to extend as hard as I can because that's how I know I'm putting a lot of force into the ground. And that's what I care about, right? Is how much force is actually going into the ground. And when I'm able to do that well, these hips are going to clear. The biggest thing with the front leg is that you're putting force into the ground that is coming back, right? Like pretty much straight back, right? We don't want to be putting force into the ground and we land and then it's like wobbly, right? And then we're leaking energy side to side. Or if we have a weak front leg, we just get over a front leg, it's a collapsing front leg. Like, no, we want to think about, okay, we're putting as much force into the ground as possible, and then throw. And useful cue is like throwing behind your front leg, especially if you're a guy who collapses over it, right? If you think about, okay, I'm going to throw behind my front leg, you're going to be able to extend, put force into the ground, and get into that nice position. Those are the 4 things I really think about. Leg lift, drop, rotation, and then the front foot just putting a bunch of force into the ground. And if you have those 4 things, then you're on your way to having pretty elite lower body mechanics. And this is something that I've seen out of the most elite throwers in the world and also myself, right? With what I feel in my delivery when I've thrown in the upper 90s. Again, if you need any type of help with gaining pitch and velocity and getting to the next level, then you can send me a message down below on Instagram, or you can book a call with me. We can talk about your situation and see if it's something where we can help. I'll see you next time.